All right, guys, how's everyone doing today? So I am DJ Wilson. I'm in my third semester here in the Athletic Leadership Graduate Program at Clemson. And I'm from Northern California originally. I did my undergrad at the University of Miami. So I always grew up between the Bay Area and South Florida. And then after undergrad, I moved back home and I got the opportunity to work for my two favorite teams briefly. I was with the Oakland A's and then the Oakland Raiders. And then when the Raiders announced they were relocating, I didn't want to move to Vegas. So I looked elsewhere and I found an opening at Stanford. And with that opening, I found a home. And for the last 4 years, I've worked in athletic marketing and fan development at Stanford University under Bernard Muir, our guest speaker here today. So Bernard, thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here.
No, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So this will be Mr. Muir's 10th year with us. He joined us in Palo Alto in July of 2012. And through 9 years, under him, we have achieved 25 NCAA championships, 34 national titles overall. And I'm very fortunate to say I have personally worked for 7 of our championship teams during my 4 years on the farm. Before Stanford, he was the athletic director at both Delaware and Georgetown. And he also worked at one point for the NCAA. So to kind of kick it off, Bernard, the first thing, obviously, we'd like to talk about, because this is recent. So being, with Stanford being a Pac-12 school, we recently announced an alliance we're going to be joining with the ACC, which myself, being a Clemson and Miami guy, obviously, close to home, and the Big Ten as well. And, just kind of reading over a few of the talking points for that. Major points of emphasis, obviously, were, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, supporting the student athletes in social justice, advocacy, postseason championships, and student athlete mental and physical health resources, just to name a few. So we'd love to hear, anything you can tell us about the new alliance and, how you think it'll be beneficial for all 3 conferences.
Yeah, well, great question. I think we're very excited. I know we're very excited to form this alliance. We have a lot of work to be done to really get it up and running. But what we're found is we have 41 schools that make up those 3 conferences that are really like-minded in terms of how we approach college sport and how we're going to approach it in the future. We think there's an opportunity, certainly from a scheduling standpoint, to give our student athletes the flexibility to compete against the likes of a Clemson, Miami, those in the ACC, as well as those in the Big Ten, which we have a long-standing relationship with the Big Ten just by the mere fact of the Rose Bowl. So we think there's just other scheduling opportunities across all of our sports, starting with football, going into the basketballs, but going into the Olympic sports as well too. And so to come together like this and really strategize, have ADs get together and figure out, okay, how can we put this puzzle together and how can we talk about the key issues that are facing college sport? And so, and then come to some rationale and hopefully create kind of an agenda to move forward that hopefully others will follow. And then we can be kind of key leaders like we consider ourselves in college sport. And so I'm very excited to see where this can go in the near future.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So guys, yeah, I'll open it up to questions here. If you're on your phone and you're unable to join us via video, you can feel free to enter a question here in the chat box, and we can just read it out loud, or there is a hand raising feature here on Zoom, or just whatever you're comfortable with. I will start myself with one thing that I would love to get Bernard's perspective on, and just to touch briefly on, my personal perspective from my time working at Stanford. The thing I found very unique, right, compared to professional organizations I've worked for, or like my time working in the athletic department when I was a student at Miami, is the support that you see among Stanford student athletes. Like, I can't tell you how many times I would be working women's basketball, women's tennis, women's volleyball, I mean, the sport really doesn't matter. And you see so many student athletes from other sports always in the crowd. And that's not like a coach mandate. They're there because they really want to be. And you see the same thing with them on social media. Like, Stanford really has a family unit amongst their student athletes. And we talked about that, Bernard, actually a lot in one of our summer classes. And I'm a big believer, obviously this is an athletic leadership class, but I'm a big believer that, that close-knit environment, I very much believe it starts at the top, with leadership. So that's something, that I've always looked towards you for. So I would just love to kind of get your perspective on what you think it takes to build that close-knit environment, whether you're, a front office employee, a coach, right, or even just a student athlete.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you noting that. It's an important part of what we feel like is our institutional fabric. I was just on a call this morning with new members to our staff, and we talked about our culture and supporting each other. We have a soccer game, women's soccer game tonight. We have a field hockey game tomorrow, and we encourage the new staff members to come out, see people. And we also talk about not only coming out to the athletic events, but coming out to the campus events, whether it's a lecture or a concert or what have you, just be fully integrated into the overall community. We are trying to push people to do that. And we know people are busy. They got these day jobs are taking up a lot of time. And so we don't expect them to be at everything, but boy, when they can, we want them to be a part. And that trickles down to our coaches, the type of coaches we're looking for. They have to understand it's bigger than just their sport or themselves, but they're part of a community as well. And hopefully they're imparting that wisdom on their student athletes, that they understand, like, we're all in this together. We have a history of celebrating the Director's Cup that measures how well you do across the board. Well, that takes a united front to get there. It can't just be one sole sport that does well, but we really need multiple sports to do well. And so I think that premise, that opportunity to bring people together and celebrate collectively just helps permeate throughout the department. And truly that starts with our coaches, not so much myself, but for our coaches to do that. And then it's contagious, especially when you're having success. And I know you guys are, those that have been around or are on the Clemson campus, understand that, what success can bring and how it can bring the community together. And so that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going off of what you were saying, that was actually another point I wanted to touch on briefly, before I open the floor here. The one thing in particular that's always stood out to me, and I've had fans, ask me like my opinion on this, and at events I've worked on the farm in the past, they always say, what is the connection between former Stanford student athletes becoming head coaches on the farm? They're like, you don't typically see a lot of that, right? At most universities, a coach getting to go back to his or her alma mater.
Yeah.
And my personal answer to that has always been, I feel like with Stanford, the unique challenges that they know student athletes are facing, I'm not saying always, but I do think sometimes you have a bit of a competitive advantage, right? If you've been through it yourself. So obviously I've worked closely during my time there with baseball, right? So I look at Coach Esker, and even though he spent, a very long time at Cal, coming back home to Palo Alto, it's the type of mindset where I know that at Stanford, even though my athletics are extremely important, like, student does come before athlete. And I know that's very much a priority for us. So I guess my question would be, because it's another thing we kind of touched on during this one of our summer classes. Can you kind of walk us through like what the hiring process looks like when there is a coaching vacancy on the farm, and how much does potentially like a former connection, like being an alum, factor into a decision you're making when you're looking at various candidates?
Yeah, another great question. I would say, every time we have an opportunity to go hire a coach, I think within a couple days, we kind of have developed our short list. We've scoured the place. We use a number of people in our department who say, "Who do you know?" And also, we get a lot of incoming. Anytime you have an opening, people will call from whether you know them or not. They're calling with opinions, and they're giving them. But a lot of times, we're trying to use our network of administrators. Other coaches may know somebody and say, "I think they'd be a good fit here." And then we're trying to cull through that list. And I would say by day 2, day 3 at the latest, we feel like we've got a short list to work from. And then we go about really trying to figure out, do we think this is the right fit? Who we're going to bring in? Let's talk to them in earnest. And then that could take some time, depending on where we are in a given season or what have you. And then to answer your second part of that question, do we look at alums? Certainly we do look at who's touched this place, whether they're a former assistant here or a former head coach, and then they went somewhere else. And could they come back? Did they graduate from here? It certainly helps. It doesn't mean that we're always going to tip the scale and say, oh, if you're an alum, that's going to give you the nod and you're going to get the job. We have done a mix. And since I've been here, we've hired many alums, but we've also hired people who are never affiliated with Stanford. And that's just trying to get a feel for people and whether they understand truly the ethos of the place and whether you can really be successful here. And so that's what through that process, we're trying to figure out. And so it's a mix. We don't go in with a set formula and saying, here's what we're going to do. But we try to get an idea of who's out there, who's available, who's gettable, to use a term we like to use, and then try to make a decision and make it the right decision, and then go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. And, going back to what I said before with how unique, our culture is on the farm and just the academic rigors of the university. I'm sure that, like I said, that can
plays a huge part in that. I mean, we have to understand, like, our admissions requirements are significant. They're lengthy. You have to fully understand it. What we ask of students coming out of high school, and so a coach that can embrace that rigor. A lot of times, we're one of the last schools that will accept a kid. It takes a long time to get that process complete, whereas others can, quickly develop a relationship, 10th grade, 11th grade, get a commit, keep going. Ours takes time because we got to see the academic profile of how well they did in high school. And sometimes it takes us a little while, and we're into the senior year before we get the word from admissions that this person can come. And so that takes some patience. And so you have to find those coaches that can accept that understand that we may lose some kids along the way, even though they're vested in them, but they make commitments that we can't make just yet. And so trying to filter through that is a big part of the process too. But they definitely have to understand the balance and the rigor that we ask for from the admission standpoint, the academic standpoint, and then allow them to do whatever they want when they come to Stanford. That's really a part of it. We're not, forcing them to take certain majors. We want them to explore anything that Stanford has to offer. And so that's where you get diversity and thought within your student athlete community.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's a great answer. We appreciate the thought that went into that. So I see that Chet has a question here, so we'll go to him first, and then before we, we'll go back and forth. I do have some questions that were submitted from students who were unable to attend today, so we'll definitely kind of work our way down the list on that, and we'll go back and forth between that and students who are live today.
Cool. Well, thank you. You kind of touched on it already, Bernard, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, so I just want to corroborate. I went online and I was reading a little bit about is it the DAPER initiative?
DAPER, yeah.
The DAPER initiative.
DAPER way. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I was hoping, with what I read online, it looked really inspiring and kind of industry leading. And I was hoping if you could elaborate a little bit more about its purpose, its reach, and what sub-programs it includes that focus specifically on leadership development.
So we several years ago, our senior team, executive team, had said, we need to have kind of a North Star, kind of pointing us in our direction. And so it was really a collaborative effort where we just said, what, we need to come up with kind of an understanding of what we're here for. What are we all about? And we created this thing called the Daper Way, and many of the tenets. We try to highlight, at least at every staff meeting, that we're all staff meeting, which we do at least a couple times a year. We try to celebrate those people that follow it, whether it's work cohesively, do the right thing, lead with courage. Those are the type of things that we're trying to celebrate. Pursue excellence in everything we do. Make sure that you understand the balance between the athletic and scholar athleticism in general. We promote that. And so we're looking for people within our campus footprint that espouse that and live that every single day. And we highlight it and we celebrate it and we acknowledge it and we emphasize it in a way that hopefully is entertaining, fun, and just a reminder of, okay, what are we doing here? And so all those things lead to building a great student athlete experience, or at least attempting to do that. Sometimes we do fall short. I'm not going to profess like everything's rosy, because it certainly is not. But we're trying to improve on that each and every step of the way. And so that's something that we work toward. And then we try to drill down and say, okay, how are we going to work cohesively? What are the things that we need to do in order to make that happen? You're looking at technology. You're looking at how we communicate with each other and how we do it. And so we spend quite a bit of time trying to refine that as we go along. So that's something that we work on. I think since I've been around, all of a sudden I've pivoted from just doing Outlook and communicating via that to now we've got Slack, that's popular. We didn't a year and a half ago. I had no idea what a Zoom call was. Now I'm well versed in Zoom. And so those are the type of things where technology has changed the way we do business, how we operate. And now coming out of this pandemic, we're going to learn about flexible scheduling and being in the office, not necessarily 5 days a week, and sometimes, and TJ, this, it's 7 days a week, but we're going to maybe work remotely and allow that to happen. So we have to be nimble, and this is part of that Daper Way experience of doing that. And then there's a byproduct of that we really was generated from our coaches, which is what we call Inspire Champions in Life. And it's a program where we have what we call our ICL principles, Inspire Champions in Life, the acronym for that. And we're asking our coaches to really lead and teach team cohesion, competitive greatness, humility, and how we just perform and be appreciative of what we have. That takes some time. That doesn't just come as a freshman. But over the course of 4 years, 5 years, we're hopeful that they will learn something from this overall experience beyond just the winning and losing. Like I said, competitive greatness is a part of it, but there's so much more that you can learn overall, and that's what we're trying to teach in Inspired Champions of Life.
Is the ICL, is that an actual program that student athletes work through, or is that more of a coaches how to equip them?
It is a program they work through. We do a lot of surveying about where they're at and the communication back and forth with their coaches. Okay. And then as they go through as a freshman, if you asked any one of our freshmen, they were like, what are you talking about? But as you get to be a senior, I think you get an understanding of, hey, this is something that we hold dear. Our coaches are constantly preaching in their own way. And so at the end of the 4 or 5 years that you're here, you can walk away saying, okay, I think I know I got more out of this experience than just the wins and losses.
Right. Is there, I'm curious, just in theme with all of this, is there a physical program that your student athletes go through for leadership development, or is it really left up to the coaches and something that they might design?
It's a little bit of both. Sometimes we have some standard programming that all student athletes will be a part of. Sometimes we leave it up to our coach to come up with, they understand this theme and then they figure out how to go about it. So it's not cookie cutter where everybody has to go through this module and then they walk out saying, okay, this is what we've done. But there are some times where we engage collectively, and there are some times where we leave it up to the coaches and their teams to decide how they're going to handle this. And so it's a combination, and it varies from year to year.
Definitely. Yeah. So
Thank you. Thank you. That's wicked
Yeah.
cool. Thanks.
we can go now. I want to take the first question off the list from one of my fellow students who couldn't make it today. And they wanted to know, so this is like a kind of a two-part question. What role has mentorship played in your career and your ascent into leadership? And who were some personal mentors in your career before you arrived at Stanford?
Yeah, another good question. I would say I've had mentors certainly along the way, almost at every stop. I could point to somebody that mentored me, whether it be one of my direct bosses or one of my alums that I engage with, who's kind of teaching me business or teaching me a different aspect of what I need to be doing in my career. But it really starts for me of just being a student athlete at Brown. My athletic director at the time, John Perry, when I first got to campus. So let me just back up, tell you a little bit about how I got to where I am. In 10th grade, I grew up in Gainesville, Florida. University of Florida was a stone's throw from my house. That wasn't too far away. I used to serve orange juice at the Gator football games. And I learned really early on that I understood business really early on, because when I sold orange juice, I would go to the student section, and I realized orange juice wasn't just a breakfast drink, and that you could mix it with some other things, and it really took off. So sales took off. And so I always wanted the student section, and I knew I could sell well. I'd say that half jokingly, but I did learn a lot. Even though I was only 13 at the time, I didn't partake, but I just learned. At the same token, because we were selling orange juice, Cokes, and so forth at the games, I'd have to show up a couple hours early, have to stay at least an hour late. And I was so intrigued by all the things that went on around the scene, all the happenings, whether it be parking, security, obviously watching the coaches warm up teams and what have you, all the fanfare around it. And I remember picking up a media guide and flipping through it, and had the staff directory. And I saw this person called the athletic director. And I realized that person was in charge of all of what was going on game day. And I thought, boy, what a way to have a career that you're doing this, and you're part of the action, somewhat part of the action, part of responsibility for all that was going on. And I thought, I want to be, from 10th grade, I was like, this is what I want to do. And so when I went to Brown, I sought out my athletic director. First few days I was on campus, and his name was John Perry. And I said to him, hey, some point I want to be in your shoes. I want to sit in the chair where you sit. And he said, you know what? I've had seniors on the way out talk to me about a job in athletics, but I've never had a freshman, albeit a cocky one, who said, hey, I want to do this. He says, let's see how things play out. You may change your mind. That's what happens in college. And we'll go from there, but I'll keep an eye on you. So my senior year, he left and became the AD at Butler University. And it just so happened I was in the same graduating class as his daughter. And he came back for graduation, ran into me, and he said, hey, what are you doing? And I gave the typical senior response, I have no idea. And he said, why don't you come out and work, do an internship at Butler? And so I did that. And I did have to say, where's Butler? I didn't know, coming from Florida, had no idea. And so he said, come to Butler in Indianapolis. And it just so happened that when I worked at Butler in athletics for the year, it happened to be the same year they co-hosted the Final Four. And so I made connections with the NCAA. Ended up a few stops later, I went back and got my master's at Ohio U. I had to do an internship, did it at Auburn. And then I got a call out of the blue from the NCAA in championships, on the basketball championship, saying, hey, we have a job opening here. And that's where I started my career at the NCAA. But mentors along the way, I think of John Perry, I think of Tom Jernstedt, who just recently passed away, but he was kind of the architect of the Final Four. He was a mentor. Bill Hancock, who runs the college football playoff, I worked directly for him at the NCAA to start. So all along the way, I've had people that have helped me. Kevin White, when I eventually left the NCAA and went to a campus, Kevin White, who's now the AD at Duke University, who just recently retired as the AD at Duke. He was at Notre Dame at the time, and he said, hey, if you're going to be an AD someday, you got to get to a campus. Why not come to Notre Dame? And so Kevin is another one of my all-time mentors in the profession. So every stop along the way, they've been really influential. I think of mentorship now as when people call and say, hey, you know what, I'd love to hear from you, like you did today. I feel like I have to pause and stop and be a part, because John Perry did that for me, and the many others that I just mentioned. So that's just part of it.
Sure. No, absolutely. And to kind of stick with that theme, in terms of that open line of communication, and how, you know, the funny thing with athletics, and I think for me, I really found this, like, my welcome to athletics moment was when I was in the Oakland Raiders front office. And there was just one particular day, right, where the vibe at lunch was just awesome. You know, we had a couple players sitting there, a couple front office people, you know, and everyone was just vibing. Things were going great. And literally within about a month's time, 3 of those people were gone and one of the players was gone. And the reality is, it's not that, there's like a very fine line there, because it's like you want to invest in those relationships because you never know where you might run into someone again down the line. But at the same time, you have to savor every moment, like at the lunch table, because there are constantly moving pieces in this industry. And, you know, the reality is people are always going to do what's best for them, or they're going to chase, you know, an opportunity to move up, like you were describing, going from working for Mr. Hancock at the NCAA, you know, into your roles at Georgetown and Delaware, then obviously coming out here, you know, being from northeastern Florida, and, you know, and ending up in the Bay Area. And kind of with that in mind, you know, to another question here from the audience. So someone was wondering if there are any leadership qualities that you consider non-negotiable for people who you're hiring to be on your staff. Like, what are things that you're absolutely never willing to bend on in terms of what you expect from people who work underneath you?
Yeah, you brought up a comment that I just want to touch on, because and then I'll answer that question. But you know, the network in college sport and in sport in general is really important. And you talked about sitting at the lunch table, and you're dealing with, you know, administrators and coaches and in this case professional athletes. Though you never know where things will go. And so I like to say to people who want to get into, especially college sport, you just got to develop relationships across the board, because you just don't know who can help you. And that could be the janitor, could be the trainer, could be the strength coach. You just don't know where somebody's going to say a word that can help or get your foot in the door. And so, and then as you're doing this leadership program, you know, this group, it can be very helpful. I just talked to a classmate of mine from Ohio U, and I've been out. It's sad to say, a year from now, I'll be 30 years out from my graduate school. We're still in touch with each other. We're trying to create a reunion of sorts, and we've done that every so often, every 10 years, I would say. And that's really important, because there's times where I pick up the phone and just say, hey, how would you handle this? So that network that you're developing right now, you just don't know. You may get in touch with somebody here 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, who could be of help. But to answer your question, just in leadership in general, what's non-negotiable? I just think, boy, you have to have passion for what you're doing, whatever the job is. I hope that people come to work who are very excited about doing what they're doing, serving the institution that you're representing. And obviously you have to know your craft. And so that's an expectation, but you have to be passionate. Then, you know, I'll never forget my graduate school professor just said, hey, 2 things you better have: you can communicate and you're loyal. And can you write? Can you communicate? And can you be loyal? Those are things that are really important. It seems simple, but now as I go through the career, it's like, yeah, that's pretty important. How do you communicate? Do you keep everyone in the loop? Or you try to just go it alone and just get things done on your own so you can take the credit? Or is it a team effort that everyone who needs to know knows, and you continue to move forward? And then loyalty to institution, to your bosses, really important. And if you got to work through things, then you get back to that communication and you work through it. And so that's to me is the non-starter.
No, absolutely. And we love that. I know for me, like I said, again, just briefly going back to my own personal experience, if you had told me when I was in college at Miami that one day I'd be working in the athletic department at Stanford, I would have probably been surprised, because I never had any previous connection to Stanford.
Yep.
And even though I'm a lifelong Oakland A's, Oakland Raiders fan, it's kind of interesting, because what I found from my experience, especially with the A's in particular, was when you see how the sausage is made, doesn't taste as great anymore. It kind of took a little bit of like the mystique, right, away from how I've always felt about the team. Whereas with Stanford, because I had no previous background, with the university or anything involving its athletic department, I think for me, I went into it without any expectations. So the fact that I've had a great experience, like I didn't have anything to balance that off of, and I was just like, this has been extremely fulfilling. You mentioned, obviously you talked about passion and the importance of that. And we actually did have a couple questions that were submitted touching on that subject in particular. One being, someone was asking how you balance passion and obsession to maintain a healthy relationship with your career. And I'll just say briefly too, Bernard, I know, because you touched on this a little bit at the start, the challenges we face here in the Bay Area in particular run a lot deeper, than just working in athletics at Stanford, right? Because you also have to consider how difficult it is, not only to get people to come out to games when there are so many other forms of just entertainment and culture here. We're so rich in that area, but also just the fact that, a lot of people work in, high tech or in economics or in finance or in different industries where their time is more limited, and dealing with the challenges of getting into Palo Alto, dealing with that 280 traffic,
Yeah.
difficult. So we would love to hear, how you kind of balance passion and obsession, and I guess kind of how you prevent yourself from burning out in that respect.
Yeah, wow, that's another great question. I would just say, you want to be good at your craft, and so you got to work at that, and you got to take the time. I think what's helpful, especially being in this area for me, is just there's so many people from different walks that have been really successful at what they're doing, and so you learn, you listen, you read, and you get a sense of what does it take to be successful, and what is successful for one person might not work for me or for somebody else. But you're trying to take bits and pieces to say, okay, I've got to be comfortable with what I know and how I would carry myself and how I communicate, like I was talking earlier. So I have to be authentic. And so that's really a piece of it for me in order to carry out the task at hand. And so that's what, I'm striving to do. But I think being in this area, yeah, I don't think I borderline obsessed, but I'm certainly trying to stay cognizant of the craft at hand and listen to my colleagues and others to just try to do this a bit better this year or this coming year than I did it last year. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned. So each and every year. And so that's what we're trying to do. But, I can understand where some people can cross the line and get into that obsession. I think you got to strike a little bit of a balance. And when you can pull away, you try to do that. And that's where the reading of other things and listening to other things, I think help.
Sure. So Chad, I saw your hand. I just really quick, while we're on passion, I want to hit one more question here first. Someone was asking when you discovered that your passion was to lead. And you touched on that briefly, right? When you were telling us about selling OJ at the Gators football games, when you had your experience with the media guide and you found out like, wow, athletic directors, like who makes all of this run on a game day. But I guess more specifically, like what helped you decide to transition into a leadership role specifically? I know I mentioned at the start that you had been obviously the AD at Delaware and Georgetown before you came out here and joined us on the farm. But, coming like from the NCAA, what made you specifically want to be in the role of athletic director? And
Yeah, I think, boy, leadership from the get-go for me early on was important. Just growing up in Gainesville, I served as a camp counselor from the time I think I was 14 into maybe my sophomore year in college. I'd come back in summer camp. To me, that was a chance to just, I always thought I'd probably coach first and then get into administration and I was just fortunate based on the story I told earlier, I got into administration quite quickly. But the roles that I would have, even as a camp counselor, was a leadership role. And so I always took that pretty seriously and thought, boy, this is someday, if I can do this with young people, then I'm going to be able to do that with hopefully, other a little bit older, younger people as students in college. And then hopefully that will translate into being able to kind of run a department. And so I always had that mindset. And whatever opportunity I was given, try to do it the very best I could, with hoping that other opportunities would present themselves, and they did. And so that was really important to me, to just take whatever role they would give me to lead, and then embrace it, and then go from there. And when I talk about communication and being able to be comfortable and getting up in front of groups and talking and being able to carry myself, I thought that was pretty important. And when I was on my playing basketball and playing even at Brown, I was a captain, and they would, I ended up being a co-captain. There'd be opportunities for us to, gather the team and talk. And, that's where you're honing your skill. And so that's to me was all those things were lessons or opportunities for lessons learned, and then grow from there.
Sure, absolutely. Chet, we wanted to circle back to you here, bud. What did you have for us?
Oh gosh, man, I feel like we've been asking some really fun questions here.
Yeah, this is really good. Yep.
I don't know how fun this one is. It's
Okay.
important.
Yep.
We've been talking about it for the past couple semesters, and we've done a lot of research in our past classes with the NCAA, and have learned, unsurprisingly, that there is a severe lack of women and people of color in leadership roles within collegiate athletics. I think it's safe to assume that Stanford identifies this as an issue and wants to be a part of that change. And so my question was, what are some of the initiatives that Stanford is taking to add more people of color and women in those leadership roles?
Yeah, really good, thought-provoking question. I would say we are working at that. We're not, certainly, I wouldn't say the industry leader in that space. I'd like to say we pride ourselves on diversity, but if you picked up our staff directory, you would see some pockets where we need to even further diversify. And so one of the things we're doing right now is we're trying to hire somebody who heads up our HR, human resources issues, but then also is in charge of what we call DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've never had that position before. And so right now we're trying to conduct a search to allow somebody to oversee both of those areas and really push us to think outside the box and to help us not only diversify our staff, but diversify how we teach diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout our entire department. What student athletes should get. As part of the chat, you had asked a question about what student athletes should get when they walk out of here. That should be a part of the curriculum some way, somehow. Just how do we get along with others? How do we,
Yeah, totally.
Right? How do we learn tolerance, and how do we learn to embrace diverse thought? That's what we're trying to do, not only for our student athletes, but for the department at large. And so hiring this person helps us at least have somebody who's also thinking about this, a thought partner, which can help advance our department. And so that's something that we're aspiring to do. And like I said, we've posted, we're soon will be interviewing people and trying to get better in that space. And the other thing we'd like to do, and DJ, you had mentioned this earlier as well, is we do like the opportunity for like young aspiring head coaches who are on our staff to become or they're assistant coaches now, but they want to become head coaches. We want to help them as well too. And if we can get diversity within our assistant coaching ranks, that just helps the message. And hopefully, we're building a tree, if you will, to allow people to go on and be head coaches, whether it's at Stanford or somewhere else, but they can be successful and they'll be part of our tree, which would be really meaningful.
Well, that's one of the things too, Bernard, that we've been learning about is that there's so much potential in athletics to help student athletes and coaches grow, not only like what people want, but what the world needs.
Yep.
And that's exciting about this new phase as we enter into diversity, as we talk about NIL, as we explore all of these different forefronts.
Yep.
It is exciting to see that there are so many opportunities for growth.
Yeah, I just was on with some staffers before, and I just said, "Boy, if you don't like change, I'm sorry, because it's coming, and you need to embrace it." And for some people, that they get anxious when you're talking about, "Hey, this is the way I've done it. I know it. I can command it." Well, that's not how the world is working. You just rattle off a few areas here that is going to spark change, and so we just need to get behind it and try to figure it out and go where we need to go. I was talking earlier, joking about technology. Boy, if I'm somebody that just does not want to, I just like my Outlook because I've mastered it and I just figured it out. That's just not going to work, because I got to figure out what this next step is. I was just on a call not too long ago with some other folks within the industry, and in this year, basketball, in the sport of basketball, they're going to be allowed to use technology on the bench. That's new, and for a coach that's never used it, that could be really a problem, because here it's coming down. Analytics has been a hot topic in sport in the last 5-10 years, right? TJ is a A's fan. I know you know about Moneyball, and they were pretty advanced, and now every organization, college or pro, and now probably in high school, they're all using analytics to try to determine how they can get an edge and be better. You got to either embrace it, or you're probably not going to be around long doing, because somebody else is going to pass you by. Those are the things that I just think, if you are embracing change, then you can adapt and be able to be successful in sport.
Yeah, definitely. And I think going off, I'm really glad you mentioned Moneyball, Bernard, because that's actually exactly what came to my mind. Like, what may start off as like a trailblazing, organizational trend quickly becomes league wide, or in our line of work, nationwide, right? Conference irrelevant. And I think a lot of people never took the approach of, well, technology is one day going to give me a competitive advantage, right? Whether it's with how we approach our analytical system, whether it's how we approach recruiting, right? There's a number of different ways you can look at that. And like you said, now it's almost gotten to a point where if you're not using modern analytics, you're pretty much being left behind, because there are just certain intangibles that you're not able to measure that some of these roles I read about nowadays, even like with the big football programs, like in Alabama or Georgia, or even, us here at Clemson, and, some of the staff roles they have, where it's like, you'll hear of like the director of like sleep quality, right? Or just things that
I have one of those there. Goodness gracious.
I don't know. Okay, so I don't know if we have that. I think that was Ohio State that I read that for. It was one of the bigger football schools, and yeah, they said they have like literally like a director of sleep and wellness. And I like it, but I couldn't help but laugh, because 5-10 years ago, people would have been like, "There's no way that's a real title." That it sounds like something you read about like on the Onion or whatever, if they're like mock athletics.
Yeah. I was going to say, there's such specialization going on. Yes. I'm not saying you have to have it, like even back up to the analytics. I'm not saying you have to have it, but it's there, it's a tool, and you may want to just be mindful of it. There's some coaches that can just do it by feel, right? And they can just go out there and execute and have a feel for the game and do it. And they don't need the analytics, but it's a nice to have, just to test, maybe you don't use it directly on game day, but you use it to just say, okay, let's evaluate where we were as a team in the last game, and what we can do in this next game if we need it. So you have all these tools, and if it's the director of sleep, that's a tool in your toolbox. Student athletes across the board are trying, and professional athletes are trying to figure out what sleep can do to give them that edge. And so I understand why you'd go there. Now there's other people within your shop that we figure out how to consult on sleep. So I'm not saying that you have to necessarily have one person to just be involved solely on that, but I kind of understand why somebody might invest in that down the road. So there's various ways in which we segment what we're doing, and then try to have staff execute on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So going now to the chat here for a minute. So one of our students here, her name is LaCaitlin Wright, and she says, "Hi, Mr. Bernard. I'm currently serving as a graduate assistant with Clemson women's basketball. I'm curious if there's any piece of advice you were given earlier in your career that continues to motivate you to this day."
I think two things that come to mind right off the bat. One, no task is too small. So it doesn't matter whether you're GA or assistant coach or head coach or senior associate AD, whatever you need to do to get the task done, whatever's asked of you, and that could be volunteer. And for another contest, they need somebody to run papers. I don't know, run stats. Although now we have technology, you don't need to do that anymore. So I'm dating myself already. But there's things that come up in a department. There's no, that you should never say, "Hey, that's beneath me. I can't do that." I have a donor who's given several millions of dollars to the university, who says, when he walks by trash on the campus because he wants the campus pristine, he picks it up, and he expects me to do so. And it doesn't. I'm not waiting for our groundskeeper to take it. That's my responsibility. And so that's where I go back to, no task is too small. And then the other thing, kind of alluded to this earlier, but you don't know who you can learn from. Caitlin, in your case, it could be your trainer. It could be the sports information director. It could be somebody who's another coach in another program. I just be listening and learning from as many people as possible. I always said when I got my first AD job, when I was working at Notre Dame, I was kind of a sponge. I never had development underneath me. I never had corporate sponsorships underneath me or compliance, but I felt like because of my engagement with those people that were in charge of that, I could at least go into an interview and be able to talk about what I would expect in those particular areas. And I think, Kayla, I'm not sure if you want to be a coach long term, but if you're trying to be, I would just be a sponge to learn from your coaches, from other coaches in other sports, watch other practices, even though it has nothing to do with basketball. There's something you can pick up, and just by interacting with all these people, including your AD there, I think that's an opportunity for you to grow and learn and become better in your craft.
Yeah, well, that's great advice. Kind of sticking with what we've been mentioning today, a number of topics that we touched on. We kind of got into the weeds with more intimate collegiate issues, especially during sports psychology class over this past summer. And one thing in particular we touched a lot on was scandal and crisis management, especially for someone who's in your shoes, Bernard. It does. I'm not going to say it comes up a lot at Stanford. I mean, I know it obviously has before, but when you're in that position, when it comes to, anything from fact gathering, because we know obviously, especially with collegiate or even professional athletics, the court of public opinion is very strong nowadays.
Is it ever? Yeah. Yeah.
With with the social media presence and sometimes questionable things being leaked and just everything that sort of entails. With that being said, when something like that does come up at Stanford, or if it were to again in the future, what steps do you kind of take in terms of like the fact gathering process, but also to kind of get out ahead of anything, especially in the event that, say, accusations might be completely false, to keep your coach or to protect your student athlete from having their entire reputation foiled by the allegations?
Yeah. It's a tough one. Obviously, we've had our share. I've been involved in those things. Last year we announced we were discontinuing sports. We then later brought them back. That you can imagine, especially sitting as the athletic director, a lot of criticism coming your way. what this is, all those decisions, I would say it's not just solely done by me. There's a united front here, and we have to wrestle with those, and we try to talk collectively. We listen. We spend a lot of time listening, trying to figure out, okay, what's in our best interest? Do we change course? Do you stay the course? And so, but the other thing I would say, if you're trying to, and you're doing this athletic and leadership program, and if you want to get into this sincerely, you've got to have some thick skin. And if you want the highest levels of leadership, you got to have some thick skin and know what you're about. And at the end of the day, you got to stick to your core and just know you're trying to do the best job you possibly can. But you think about the coaching profession in general. Like Caitlin was just talking about that, what her role is. If this is what you aspire to, you just think about the criticism that you get, especially, you're apt as a coach, you're going to suffer some losses. You're not going to go undefeated, most likely forever. And so after every loss, there's going to be a heap of criticism. And now with this thing called this social media, boy, people are on you quickly. And it happens. And for me as an AD, boy, when one of our teams comes up short and doesn't come shy of winning a national championship, I may get some criticism, and but I just have to take it and know that we got to continue what the goal end game is, and just stick to the focus on that. Have to engage in some forms with people. I'm not engaging on the social media front because you just can't win that battle in my mind. But at the same token, I'm just kind of forging ahead if given the opportunity to say, here's the direction we're headed in, and here's what we're going to stick to. And we're going to sometimes ignore some of the noise. Sometimes we have to engage in the noise, and sometimes we just got to ignore it and keep moving forward. And trying to balance all of that is a part of the skill set you need in order to do what you're doing in athletics leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad, Bernard, that you touched briefly on the 11 teams that were being discussed at the start of COVID-19 potentially being discontinued from Stanford. Obviously, we have since reversed course on that, but I was noticing a lot of comments, on Instagram and just throughout the community, and it actually did come up in one of our classes. And I think more than anything, a misconception a lot of people have with Stanford in particular is that, they're seeing a very wealthy university endowment, and that they're assuming that trickles down heavily to the athletic department.
Yeah.
And I know firsthand from seeing behind the scenes that in a lot of ways that is not the case. I've seen examples so extreme that when I've worked events promoting athletics, and say over at our medical school, right, like a new student orientation, we have students coming in who don't understand why we even have athletics at all, because the entire focus should be on medical and law and just all on academia. So with that being said, I would love to hear whatever you're able to kind of tell us on what went into the process, and how much maybe, I'm not going to say outside noise, but how much, let's just say, like, public pushback maybe did contribute to the university deciding to reinstate the 11 teams who were initially going to be disbanded.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things were a factor in that. One, the first premise of why we thought we had to discontinue was because of resource constraints and where we were headed. Even with a big endowment that you see for the university, several billions of dollars, that money doesn't flow to athletics. That flows to other parts of the campus for research and learning. That's primarily why we are here, right? So, and many of those endowments are restricted, so it can't flow necessarily to athletics. And since the university is trying to be great in so many different things, they've got to prepare to distribute the resources accordingly. What changed was, primarily, yes, we did get a lot of outcry from alumni and friends, but also our endowments went up even more. And so there was some flexibility the university had to give us some resources. The other thing that many people don't realize, and even people close to us, when you're running 36 sports, and I'm not sure what Clemson has, but I know it's not that many compared to the 36, but there's so many schools. The average across the country is 18, 20, somewhere in there. And so when you're saying we're running 16 sports more than the average, that's significant, and it takes dollars to do it and do it well. That's the other thing we're trying to do here at Stanford. We're trying to do everything well, and so that takes a significant commitment. So one of the things also that had changed is we had a lot of donors step up and say, we want to help. This is important to us. It's important to the fabric of the place, and so that put us in a different position where we had to reevaluate to say, well, maybe there is a runway where we can get to be financially solvent, get some support from the center, if you will, and then continue to run and fund 36 varsity programs and do it well. And we're not completely there yet. We've got a lot of work to be done, but we're trying to mend fences and be able to put 36 programs in a good position where I use a term that we want everyone to be in the hunt. And that means once every 4 years to wake up. We want student athletes to wake up thinking, we could win a conference championship. We could win, maybe even make a run and win a national championship. But we have to be put in a position. We would like to be put in a position where we could have that level of success. And so that is truly our goal. And now I think we've got a runway to go out and do that. But it was really hard when you're in the midst of it and trying to figure this out and figuring out, do you have the resources? It's coming from a number of the places that I just mentioned. And if it happens, great. If it doesn't, makes it difficult. You got to make tough decisions. And so I'm glad where we landed, and I'm glad where we're now moving toward. But yeah, it was really difficult along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we were talking about briefly too, with with scandals and crisis management, unfortunately, in an event like this, the general public and the fans, as much as we need them, they don't often wait for all the facts to come out right before they too much assume a very strong stance on any particular issue. And I know obviously that doesn't make the job any easier, because like you said, you're counting on the university. Well, sorry, you're not counting on the university. You're counting on the athletic department, like the donors and various alumni, potentially, former professional athletes, to come through in terms of being able to help you with those resources, just because of the fact that the university does allocate so many of its funds, into research and into just other aspects of, there's so many different things we do at Stanford, and so many of them don't touch athletics in any way.
Yeah, I think the main thing is just running sports in general across the country is expensive, right? And because we're trying to stay competitive with each other, we tend to, we want to generate more and get another edge. And so it's competitive. We used to say there's an arms race, and that used to be just facilities, but that's not the case now. It's every aspect of the college sports scene. So whether it's your sports psychologist, you want to be the best and have more to make sure you're covering, in our case, 900 student athletes. You want to have the best athletic trainers. You want to have appropriate coverage there. You want to be the best in that. You want to be the best in food, right? And so we want to have the best offerings in food, because that's part of the experience as well too. So you can go on and on how you travel, how you train, where you train. And so that's really important. And we invest in that more and more. And sometimes you realize, boy, to try to do this, in our case, for 36, that puts a lot of strain on the system. And I'm saying that when we do have a really robust endowment, and we have a robust endowment for athletics. That's how one of the hallmarks of at least our program. But even with that, we were stretching it thin. And so that's just something you're seeing across higher ed. And there's great scrutiny as to how we use those dollars in the future. And so that's what we're trying to figure out.
Absolutely. Did anyone else who was live here today have any final questions for Bernard? I know if not, we've got one more from one of the students who couldn't be here today. They were wondering, so, and now that we're through the thick of it, Bernard, this will feel like a softball question.
Okay. I like those.
They were just wondering, in the day-to-day grind of being an athletic director, what is your favorite part of this job? What do you enjoy the most?
That is a great softball. I truly like the interaction, the variety of interaction. So today I'm on a Zoom call with the master's program from Clemson. Tomorrow, I'm going to be at a soccer game or a field hockey game. I could be sitting with an alum and trying to raise some dollars. The variety is great, and no day looks the same. And so that's what I really enjoy. And the interaction with people. Especially during COVID, you realize how much you miss that daily interaction just by walking the hallways and bumping into people and having conversations. That I do miss, but I also love the competition, which is why we're all here, to allow student athletes to do their thing. And so watching that unfold is really great.
Of course. Yeah. And like we said, you've certainly had no shortage of success at Stanford. 25 national championships, and as you enter your number 10, 25 NCAA and 34 national titles. And obviously that record speaks for itself. So
that's won by student athletes, not by myself. I'm just glad I could be along for the ride and watch that unfold. But I like being a part, trying to play a part to help provide that opportunity for them to go compete and do it well. So that's pretty exciting.
Of course. Yeah.
Yep. We're closing up because I do have to jump. I'm late for another call, but
yes, we are. No,
it is good to be with you guys, and good best of luck, especially as you start another academic year, and good luck to everyone on their program.
Yeah, as we stop recording, just wanted to say, Bernard, these last 4 years, just from my perspective, have been truly just the most enjoyable of my life. I've loved my work at Stanford. And like I said, this is emphasized to us a lot in this program, but we very much believe that leadership starts with the direction at the top, and that it has a very strong trickle down effect. And I know I speak for a lot of my fellow coworkers at Stanford when I say that you've definitely, put us in a position where we feel, empowered to really be ourselves and, unlock our personal potential. So I just want to say, thank you so much, not only for your time today, but also, for the mentor role you've played, in my life, and, now as a personal friend as well.
So, well, thank you. Appreciate that. And again, thank you for having me, and best of luck to everyone. And if I could be helpful down the road, feel free to reach out.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again so much, Bernard, for your time today. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
No worries.
Thanks, guys. Thanks to both of you.
Have a good day.
Right. You as well.